Like much of the audience of Rings of Power, I've been frustrated by the series, to put it lightly. I think there were some good things about it, but for the most part, it is a miserable letdown. This makes me sad because I wanted so badly to like it. I love the world of Lord of the Rings, and Peter Jackson's films are some of my absolute favorites. We could spend the entire day talking about how magnificent these films are, but that's a topic for another time. I think that the first and perhaps most important problem with Rings of Power comes when we compare it to Lord of the Rings. As fans of Tolkien, our expectations were set astronomically high because of Peter Jackson's work and by the works of the author himself. In large part, the backlash from fans comes because those expectations were not met. I can't speak for everyone, but I know my hopes were dashed. I spent a lot of time thinking about how it could have been better. As other YouTube critics have pointed out, the main failing of Rings of Power is the writing. The plot is a mess, the dialogue is weak, there are completely pointless characters, and there are some pretty awful storytelling decisions that caused all of us to raise our eyebrows or just laugh out loud at the stupidity of it all. I've spent a lot of time watching and listening to reviews of the series, and I've had a lot of ideas about how it could have been improved with a few minor and some major changes to the plot and characters. I'm a writer myself, and I spend a lot of time thinking about stories and how I can write ones that are both satisfying to myself and to my audience. So rather than complain about the show's failings, of which there are a lot, and in the spirit of trying to create something satisfying from this mess, I present to you my version of Rings of Power, how I would have rewritten it had I been a part of the creative process, which totally would not have happened, but hey, a girl can dream. In doing this, I hope to bring some small amount of joy and satisfaction in fantasizing about what could have been. If at the end of the day, the only one who enjoys this is me, I still think that that's a success. Hello, I am your host, and this is...
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
To start, I want to explain some of the major changes I would make to the story and the characters. Because this is all theoretical and really fan fiction, if we're being honest, I am not bound by the same copyright restrictions that the writers of Rings of Power were. Therefore, I will use all of the material in the series as well as the entire Tolkien canon in my series rewrite. So yes, if you haven't seen the Amazon series or read the Silmarillion, this is your spoiler warning. First on my list of changes is Halbrand. Oh, Halbrand. I liked his character well enough up until they turned him into Sauron, and then I didn't like him anymore. So in my story, he is not Sauron. I have other plans for him, but I won't tell you quite yet what they are. Second of all, the Harfoots. There is no other way to say this. I am getting rid of them. They add absolutely nothing to the story, and the stranger's character arc can be told just as well, if not better, without them. Thirdly, Númenor. This is a tricky one because I really liked the Númenorians and I wanted to have more of them. I felt it was completely unnecessary for Galadriel or Halbrand to come to their island. So in my version of the Rings of Power, I want to separate the Númenorian story completely from the rest. In this way, I want to treat it kind of like Daenerys' story in Game of Thrones. You know, the main action is going on over here in Middle-earth, but this story in Númenor is also really important and will eventually tie in, sort of thing. And lastly, Galadriel. Instead of the irritating, agenda-pushing, pseudo-female character that she is in the show, I would make her more wise and less thoughtless. She will also have her magical abilities, which were surprisingly left out of the show, and I think that's probably because they would have solved all of the problems way too quickly. But anyway. With that out of the way, let us begin. As in the show, there would be a prologue. However, the sequence would be much longer. I'm thinking like 15 to 20 minutes instead of just 5. And it would go into more of the history of Valinor and Morgoth. That is what I wanted from the prologue, but because of the obvious restrictions the writers had, it wasn't possible. In my version of the prologue, Galadriel would narrate how the ending of the Peace of Valinor came when Feanor, in his pride, created the Silmarils. Morgoth lusted after them, eventually destroying the trees and escaping to Middle-earth, where the elves followed, taking a terrible oath to retrieve the Silmarils at any cost. For the sake of time and not bogging the story down with tons of unnecessary details, the history of the Silmarillion would obviously need to be truncated. And since Galadriel is our chief main character, I think that much of that history would revolve around her and her family. I'd like to see them cross the Helcaraxe into Beleriand and then struggle through the wars against Morgoth. I'd like to see more of Finrod in action, caring for his family, leading elves, and establishing his kingdom of Nargothrond. Even seeing Galadriel fall in love with Celeborn or train in the mystic arts with Melian would be interesting. Galadriel could narrate that despite their joys, evil continued to grow deeper and stronger, and Morgoth reigned supreme in the north of the world. Against hope, a host of the Valar came to Middle-earth to help the beleaguered elves. Together, the elves and men and the host of the Valar fought the War of Wrath, in which they defeated Morgoth and drove his minions back. But all was not victory, for the Silmarils were lost, and the blood that had been spilt over them was flooded with unnumbered tears. Galadriel's brother Finrod was dead, and her husband Celeborn was never found again. Because we spent more time with Finrod in the prologue, we as the audience care more when he dies. To a certain extent, we feel the loss that Galadriel feels. We understand better her anger and her grief. Now here, I would make one small change from the show and a major change from the Silmarillion canon. Instead of dying while seeking out Sauron or helping Beren and Luthien retrieve a Silmaril, Finrod dies during the War of Wrath, where at some point he was captured and tortured by Sauron in the pits of Thangorodrim. The elves find his broken body in the storming of Morgoth's fortress and bring it back to a grieving Galadriel. It is here that she takes her oath. She knows that Sauron escaped capture. The loss of her brother and her husband and so many friends and relatives has completely pushed her over the edge. Over the body of her brother, she makes an oath that she will seek out Sauron and enact vengeance for everything she has suffered in Middle-earth. The sigil, which was carved into her brother's flesh, is difficult to make out, but she takes it as a sign that Sauron still lives. As in the series, Galadriel then spends centuries hunting for Sauron. There would be many more instances shown of her and her band searching for Sauron in all parts of the world, in fields, through mountains, by the ocean. As they're climbing through mountains of ice, trying to find the ancient fortress of Utumno, Galadriel acknowledges to herself how very tired she has become. The more they search, the more it becomes obvious to her and to the elves she is leading that it has become pointless. Sauron is either too hidden and is biding his time, or he really has left Middle-earth for somewhere else. Galadriel is ready to call it quits and go home, but she wants to follow this one last lead. They make it to Utumno under great trial, and there they find the sigil as they do in the show. At last, Galadriel's desire to find Sauron is revived. The sigil is more detailed than it was on her brother, and she thinks that this will give them a vital clue to find Sauron. They search the keep, but it is clearly deserted. Galadriel recognizes there is nothing more to be done. It would be best to look through the information that the elves possess to try and decipher the sigil. Besides, the members of her company are all weary with their task, and she can tell that they are all, herself included, at the breaking point. With that, they return home. Galadriel and Elrond reunite and catch up. I imagine it's been a couple 100 years since they last saw each other. Elrond mentions his brother and how much he misses him. Elros's posterity live on in Númenor, but for the past several years, elves are no longer welcome on the island nation. That is surprising to Galadriel, as the men there were placed on the island because of their help in the war against Morgoth. She says that if they are rejecting the ancient ways, it will prove ill for them. With Elrond's help and the elven historians of Lindon, Galadriel searches for the sigil. Now that she has the more detailed picture from the fortress of Utumno, it becomes more clear that the sigil is actually a map of the Southlands. Her resolve to find Sauron is awakened, and she wants to be able to go to the Southlands to find why Sauron would leave this as a sign for his minions to follow. Elrond tries to discourage her, but is not successful. As in the show, Galadriel and her crew are offered the chance to return to Valinor as thanks for their efforts in seeking out Sauron and ensuring the peace over the last centuries. However, instead of even getting on the boat to Valinor, Galadriel leaves in the middle of the night, shielded by her magic powers, to head out for the Southlands. Elrond catches her and begs her not to go, not to give in to the darkness that such revenge could lead to. Galadriel responds that this goes beyond revenge. If Sauron really has come back, or is hiding nearby, then the elves must know about it. She admits that she is tired, but that if there is a chance Sauron is out there, she has to take it. Elrond lets her go, though reluctantly. As she leaves, several meteor-like things fall from the sky. Okay, here's where things get a little tricky because we're balancing multiple storylines at the same time. The order here is arbitrary. They don't need to go in the order I present them, but the story as a whole would, of course, all weave together. We go to the village in the Southlands. The story here plays out much as it does in the show. Arondir and the other elves who guard Ostirith are preparing for a change of the guard. In my version of the story, they don't abandon the keep completely because no message is sent that the war is over. Gil-galad is not an idiot. He knows that Sauron could still be out there, and besides, there are other dangers. It's just a good idea to have outposts in distant lands. The guard at Ostirith changes every few decades or so because even elves grow weary. There are some who stay and some who do not. Arondir, for obvious reasons, i.e. Bronwyn, stays. Some elves leave, and Arondir, along with a few others, stay to await the new arrival of troops. As they do in the show, Theo and his friend find the mysterious sword hilt hidden in the village and wonder what it could be. While Arondir waits, the village hears rumors of trouble in the north, of orcs rising up and killing whole villages. Their area remains secure because of the elves and the keep, so the people aren't too worried about it, but it worries Arondir. He volunteers to go after the other elves to warn them, and is captured by the orcs. Next we go to Elrond. After Galadriel leaves and the boat with her soldiers departs for Valinor, he has a conversation with Gil-galad about her. Gil-galad says that Galadriel is one of the oldest elves left in Middle-earth, one of the last to have seen the light of the trees of Valinor. She is less of an elf and more a force of nature that cannot be held back, and they would be foolish to try. She's gone through more pain and sorrow than either of them could hope to imagine. If searching for Sauron can bring her the peace she seeks, then he will, reluctantly, let her search, though he thinks it's fruitless. Elrond just hopes that in her search she will not lose herself. Gil-galad says sadly that he fears this has already happened. We can tell by the pain in Elrond's face that he shares that fear. I'll pause here and say that Elrond's story was by far my favorite in the show. I loved the conflict between himself and Durin and their friendship. Personally, I felt their story was the best written part of the whole show, so in my version of the show, it's almost exactly the same. Gil-galad orders Elrond to go to Eregion to work with Celebrimbor, who is working on an important project. The king isn't quite sure what it is because Celebrimbor has been so secretive about it, so his purpose in sending Elrond is pretty much to spy. Once there, the plans for the forge are revealed. Elrond suggests that they ask the dwarves for help, and thus the whole drama with an angry Durin and the rock-splitting contest play out. Elrond and Durin make up, and the dwarves promise to help with the construction of the forge. Now we cut to Galadriel. After many weeks of traveling, she is nearing the Southlands. She comes across a band of refugees led by a man named Halbrand, who have fled from the north part of the Southlands near the mountain Orodruin. What eventually becomes Mount Doom. They fled because the threat of the orcs became too great. The orcs attacked the capital, killed the king, and the people fled. It comes out that Halbrand is the son of the lately killed king. He wasn't meant to inherit the throne, being one of the younger sons, but his entire family was cut down and only he survived. He doesn't want to lead, but the people look to him, and Galadriel tries to help him see this. In a small scuffle with some orcs who were following the refugees, Galadriel notices that Halbrand is very good with a sword. She asks him and any men who would be willing to join her on a quest to follow the orcs to Sauron. Initially, Halbrand refuses, but then decides to join her because he is drawn to leadership and power, and he recognizes both in Galadriel. They journey together into the Southlands. Now we join the stranger. His story and arc are practically the same, just without the Harfoots. The stranger falls from the sky into a pit of fire in the earth. He is mostly incapable of speech and is scared and alone when he wakes up. He wanders around for a little bit and finds a village of people. After hiding from them and stealing their food, someone finds and takes him in. This person, probably a young girl and her family, sees that he is very childlike and just wants to understand who he is. But then the mystics come, much earlier than they do in the show, and after a brief interrogation, they discover that he is not, in fact, Sauron. They attack him, he fights back, and the village gets caught in the crosshairs. Everyone in the village is killed, and the buildings burn as the stranger escapes into the wild, pursued by the mystics. Back to Arondir. He meets the other elves in captivity as they are working for the orcs to build deep tunnels that don't seem to lead anywhere. They try to escape and are unsuccessful. They discover that the orcs are looking for something, an artifact of great evil power, though it doesn't seem to have much to do with the digging of the tunnels. Arondir meets Adar, who confirms that they are indeed searching for something. He lets Arondir go, telling him that the people of the villages around Ostirith must join him or be destroyed. If they are hiding the artifact, he and his orcs will find it. Arondir goes back to the village and gives them the warning. As in the show, part of the people choose to join Adar, and part of them go to the keep and fortify it against siege, bringing food and weapons with them because it would be stupid if they didn't. It would also be stupid if they left the safety of a well-defended keep and tried their luck in a village where they could be attacked from any direction. Cut to Galadriel and Halbrand. They have spent many days tracking the orcs through the Southlands. They follow what appears to be the main host south. Along the way, they meet the elven replacement troops who are on their way to Ostirith. Their small group makes it to the keep just as the siege begins. Theo reveals that he has the sword hilt, and they agree that this is what Adar is searching for. There is a big debate about whether they should just give it up or keep it. Galadriel fears that if they gave it up, it would bring about great evil. She encourages them to fight, though the odds are insurmountably stacked against them. Cut to the stranger. He is wandering from place to place now, trying to stay hidden. The only time I would be okay with Harfoots coming into the show would be as a cameo as they watch him walk by, hidden in a field or something. An older man comes across him, and although the stranger is frightened that he will bring death upon him, the man wants to help. He teaches the stranger how to speak better, and it is clear that the stranger is a fast learner. The man tells him how he saw stars fall from the sky, and asks if the stranger was one. He confirms it. The stranger shows the man the constellation he is trying to find, and the man tells him that he saw this in his youth when he lived in Rhûn. He says that perhaps the stranger needs to go to Rhûn to discover who he is. If there were multiple fallen stars, then perhaps there are others like him whom he must find. The stranger is about to leave when the mystics catch up. Although the stranger tries to prevent it, they kill the old man who helped him. The mystics then torture the stranger and try to find out what he knows about Sauron. They have come to serve him, and they think the stranger will know where he is. They say that the stranger is powerful, but if he joined them in their search for Sauron, they could teach him more, and Sauron would be able to raise him higher than anyone in the world. It seems that for a moment, the stranger is tempted to take the offer. We return to Elrond. The construction of the forge for Celebrimbor is going well. The dwarves have proven to be excellent in their work and have performed much more quickly than was expected. They admit to having crafted special tools for the task, tools made of mithril, a new ore that the dwarves recently discovered in their mines. Here's where I would make another major change to the show. Mithril, as presented in Tolkien's canon, is a special ore, but there is nothing more special about it other than it is extremely light and hard. I took major issue when the show tried to make mithril some mythical substance tied with the Silmarils. It made no logical sense at all. The dwarves are using these special mithril tools to craft the forge, and Celebrimbor becomes immediately interested in the ore. He wants to get some for himself for whatever experiment he is conducting, but the dwarves refuse, Durin's father being among the forefront. Mithril is quite rare, and it is treacherous to mine. Besides, there's a little bit of greed on the side of the dwarves. They want to keep the mithril for themselves and their own purposes, not give it to the elves, who they don't trust completely. Elrond tries to negotiate for some mithril, but all he gets in the end is a very small amount. Eventually, he gives it to Celebrimbor, who is disappointed to have so little, but is determined to make of it what he will. Cut to the Southlands. The battle of Adar's orcs against Ostirith goes well initially, but then just by sheer numbers, the heroes start to lose, and badly. In the heat of the battle, Bronwyn falls by the sword of an orc. Blinded by fear and anger, Arondir dies, trying to defend her body. Adar's forces surround the keep, and things are looking very grim for Galadriel, Halbrand, and the other surviving village members and elves. Galadriel tries to negotiate with Adar, but he will not back down. He talks of the new world that he is creating, and that they should join him or die. Either way, death for them is inevitable. Then Theo gives Adar the hilt of the sword, on the condition that he will let the people in the keep depart the Southlands in peace. Adar agrees and orders his troops to retreat, taking the sword hilt with them and marching towards Orudreen. Mount Doom. Why is that so hard? The aftermath of the battle is pretty depressing. Theo mourns the loss of his mother, and Arondir and others mourn those whom they have lost. Galadriel has a moment of intense self-doubt. Did she really do the right thing in coming to the Southlands? She is fairly certain that Adar is not Sauron, but in encouraging these people to fight, what has she brought upon them but death and misery? She's about to turn and leave the Southlands forever with the villagers when Theo reminds her of the evil the orcs could do with that sword. She determines that she will follow Adar and his orcs and see what he plans to do, and to stop him if she can. She invites Halbrand to come with her again, but Halbrand has realized he has a duty to the people of the Southland to protect and guide them. Galadriel encourages him to find other refugees and lead his people north to Eregion. The elves would be able to help them find a new place where they can live in peace. She promises to join them when her search is completed. Cut to the stranger. His time with the mystics has taught him a lot. He's more articulate now and realizes a very important truth. The mystics claim to serve Sauron, and they have little regard for human or any life. They hurt people without a thought and destroy everything that comes in their path. He doesn't want to be like that. So he rejects the mystics and their invitation to join them, and a big battle ensues. Although he is newly awakened and still doesn't know much about himself, he is very powerful. He is able to defeat the mystics, who flee away from him, badly wounded and or incapacitated in some way. Then he starts to make his way to the east, hoping to find what he is looking for. Cut back to Galadriel. She follows the orcs as they make their way to Mount Doom. Then, inexplicably, they hide themselves inside the tunnels we saw before, and Adar continues on alone with just a small handful of orcs. Despite her cunning, Galadriel is tired and angry, and she gets caught. She fights ferociously and kills the orcs with a great slaughter, but she is eventually subdued. Adar takes her to a cave in the mountainside, where they have an important conversation. She demands to know who he is and who he serves. Adar smiles and says that she knows who he serves better than anyone, for who knows the darkness better than those who live in it? It is at this moment that Galadriel realizes she's gone too far. Adar places the sword into a slot in the wall. This activates the lava below, which has been waiting to be released. Adar forces Galadriel to watch, helpless, as the volcano erupts and turns the land to ash. They and the orcs are kept safe from the pyroclastic flow because of the deep tunnels they dug for this reason, to survive the blast. When they emerge, it will be a new land, a land prepared for them. Using either her magic powers or the confusion of the explosion, Galadriel escapes Adar and flees the Southlands. The explosion of Mount Doom is enormously important. Nothing like this had happened in a very, very long time. This, more than anything, is proof that Sauron is once again on the move. The fleeing Southlanders pause in the mountains as they watch their homeland become engulfed in flames and ash. Galadriel tries desperately to find cover before she is swallowed by the pyroclastic flow. Adar and his orcs glory in the destruction. Even the stranger can sense something has happened and turns to see clouds of ash and lightning fill the sky. Ash falls in Eregion and Lindon, alarming the elves. We rejoin Halbrand and his people weeks later as they make it to Eregion. The elves ask for news, and they confirm that Mount Doom has exploded. This is very disturbing. Halbrand mentions how Galadriel helped them, and Elrond demands to know where she is. Halbrand explains her plan, but that he thinks it was impossible for anyone to survive that explosion. Elrond is devastated, thinking her quest has finally claimed her life. Several days later, Galadriel stumbles into Eregion, almost dead with exhaustion. Once she is recovered, she tells Elrond of Adar and the orcs, and that she knows that Sauron has returned. Elrond is very troubled by this, and promises he will ride for Lindon immediately to bring the news to Gil-galad. The king will decide what must be done next. Elrond tells her that she has done enough, and that she should rest. She disagrees, saying that it is for the fate of Middle-earth that they must now fight against Sauron's rise. He fears that her desire for vengeance has returned, but she tells him what she learned and how she has changed. There is no good in fighting evil if, in the process, you become evil yourself. She is determined to fight Sauron from the light, and wants to lay aside her days of wielding a sword behind her. Elrond is happy and relieved to hear this. Before Elrond leaves, he shows Galadriel Celebrimbor's forge, which has been recently completed. Galadriel catches up with Halbrand, who tells her that the elves have granted that he and his people can live in the northern lands, a land called Angmar. That's right, people. I'm making him the Witch King. Personally, I just think this is better than trying to force him into this Sauron mold. Halbrand just never struck me as Sauron. It seemed much too forced. This way, his character is much the same, but he's just a human, though eventually he will ally himself with Sauron, but we're not to that point yet. Then, as Galadriel is curious about the purpose of the forge, Elrond takes her to Celebrimbor's workshop. The tables are scattered with various ores and round objects, delicate instruments, and the like. Elrond hails Celebrimbor and praises him on his work, saying that Gil-galad will be very pleased. Celebrimbor says that if it weren't for their distinguished guest, none of this would be possible. I owe much of my success to him, he says, gesturing to the side, and one of the workers turns around with a small smile. This is Anatar, says Celebrimbor. Now, casual fans may be a little confused, but just to spell it out, this is Sauron, just in case that's not clear. Now, you may have noticed that I haven't mentioned Númenor at all in the synopsis so far. Because Númenor is its own completely separate story, I think presenting it by itself here at the end makes the most sense. It would, of course, be interwoven with all the storylines I've explained up to this point. As I mentioned at the start of the video, one of my major changes I would make from the series is that I would completely take Galadriel and Halbrand out of the Númenor story. Instead, the story of Númenor would focus mainly on the political drama happening there. Because the show is only briefly in Númenor, I've had to fabricate most of this storyline. I'd like there to be more of a focus on the conflict between the faithful, those who still support the old elvish ways, and the Kingsmen, those who don't. King Tar-Palantir would play a larger role. He's old, but not on his deathbed. He's actively trying to beg the Valar for forgiveness for the sins of his people, because at this point, most of the Númenorians had rejected the ways of the elves. He tries to bring many of the old elven traditions back, but he is met with opposition. He encourages his daughter Miriel to follow after him, but she's too close to the people and wants to please them. Pharazôn, the king's advisor, is very manipulative, but he can't do much while the king is well and alive, so he just schemes and bides his time. The captain of the King's Guard is Elendil. He comes from a long line of the faithful, but in order to secure his place in the royal court, he has had to reject much of what he was as a youth. He has two sons, Anarion and Isildur. As I think they did in the show, I'm going to switch up the birth order here, just for the sake of the story. I'm also getting rid of the sister, because, let's be honest, she added literally nothing to the show. Anarion lives with the faithful on the west side of the island. He rejected his father's stubbornness and went to live with his mother's family there. This brings Elendil both shame and anger, because he knows that is where he should be. The ambition of his youth has faded, leaving him cynical and tired. But because he is also proud and stubborn, he is harder on Isildur to make something of his life. Isildur isn't sure where he belongs. He loves his brother and his father, but each tell him to choose between two different lifestyles, and he doesn't know which he should choose. In thinking up conflicts for this story, I came up with the idea that Miriel has a daughter. This daughter is young, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. The father died some years ago in a duel or something and is out of the picture. Pharazôn hires some thugs to kidnap the daughter. He hopes to blame the kidnapping on the faithful, further dividing the political tension between the two factions. Muriel is obviously very distraught, and Tar Palantir dispatches Elendil and whomever else he wishes to go and find the girl. I like the idea that Elendil would bring Isildur along, hoping to teach him a lesson about leadership and bravery. Somehow Anarion gets involved as well in this search, and it's an awkward time for all of them. Part of their story would be Anarion and Isildur trying to understand their father better, and Elendil slowly starting to realize that he needs to rejoin the faithful. Now, eventually, the girl is rescued and returned to her mother. There's more political intrigue, more drama between the faithful and the king's men. This culminates in an assassination attempt on the king, which greatly wounds him. Muriel, in an attempt to save his life, is blinded. I don't really know how, I just liked that small detail from the show, and I want to keep it. At some point near the end of the Númenor story, the people are disturbed to see ash falling from the sky, fallout from Mount Doom, not knowing what it could mean. As the king lays dying, the leaves of the white tree also begin to fall, mixing with the ash, and the faithful know that dark times are ahead of them. And that's about all I've got for Númenor for this season. Like I said, it's a story completely separate from the others, so it was difficult to come up with some unique storylines that could span an entire season. But I think what I came up with is pretty good. So, to recap, we are left at the end of the season with the world reeling in the aftermath of a monumental volcanic eruption. The elves begin a renewed search for Sauron, the stranger is off to Rhûn to try and discover who he is, and the Númenóreans are becoming more interested in the dealings of Middle-earth. The end of the season begins the slow rise of Sauron, and the reveal of Anatar tells us that not everything is as it seems. And that, my friends, is the end of my version of Season 1 of Rings of Power. Oh, if only... Well, thanks for letting me take you along on this very hypothetical journey. I hope I didn't bore you too terribly with my ideas, but it gave me a lot of joy to write. I hope it's entertaining in some small way. I don't know about you, but this is a show I definitely would have enjoyed. If you liked the theory, go ahead and like the video and leave a comment below about how you think the show could have been, or if you have ideas to add to the theory. If I get enough likes and comments, I'll make a video for seasons 2 and 3. It won't be as detailed, I only have a few ideas, but I think it could be fun. Anyway, thanks for watching, and keep your eye out for more videos coming soon.